Hi, students. This week we are going to be looking at the Hellenistic world. And I give you these facial expressions because I love this art. It is so fantastic, so breathtakingly beautiful to me, and I cannot wait to introduce you to this. I wish that we were in class together so that I could see all of your facial reactions. Some of you are going to be like, what? Some of you are going to be like, oh. Some of you are going to be like, and I'll be like, wait, wake up. No. So the Hellenistic world. Now I've given you this map just to keep us grounded. We're going to be looking at the world where Alexander the Great's empire once was. Once was? So, the Hellenistic period goes from 323 with the death of Alexander the Great to 30 BCE. Wow, we have come a long way since our first lecture. Remember in ancient art, in prehistoric art, we were at like 30,000 BCE with the lovely Venus of Willendorf, right? So we're going to be looking at this roughly 300-year period of time, and historians and art historians call this the Hellenistic period because, well, everything is Greek-like. In fact, that's where the word comes from. Hellen, remember, the Greeks called themselves the Hellenes. So when we say Hellenistic, anytime you add istic to something, like realistic, naturalistic, it means like or similar to or of that. So Hellenistic, Greek-like. This is a period in art where we see a major infusion of Greek art and culture into a larger scope, that larger scope of area. That larger scope is right here. So this map is showing you the division of Alexander the Great's empire upon his death. He died in 323 without an heir to the throne. Depending on people's accounts of his symptoms, we think he died of malaria. And when he died, he had a wife, a Bactrian princess. Bactria is the area right over here. It's modern day Afghanistan. So his Bactrian princess was pregnant, but many people were, even at the time, arguing that it wasn't Alexander's baby because Alexander was also known to have male lovers. And so people were arguing that she wasn't pregnant by Alexander, therefore it wouldn't be a rightful heir if it was ever born successfully and if it was a boy. Turned out it was a boy. And her baby boy were isolated and mistreated and died rather tragically and suddenly. And the division of Alexander's empire went to his 5 major commanders, his 5 major generals. And each of the empires was meant to be equal in terms of their status and within the status of the empire. So here we are looking at some of the kingdoms, because they took these lands and became kings of these lands. Some of these kingdoms are a little bit smaller, but these kingdoms are inheriting Greek or Macedonian lands, and larger areas are going to be handling, well, like the kingdom of Seleucus. Seleucus kingdom gets most of what was Persia. Here and here are the 2 kingdoms that we'll be looking at in this class. The kingdom of Ptolemy and the kingdom of Antigonus. Technically, I guess we're not looking at the kingdom of Ptolemy. The only thing I'll say is that Alexander's commander, Ptolemy, is given basically Egypt. He becomes the pharaoh of Egypt and thus begins the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. I mention this because I know that some of you are interested in Cleopatra. Yep, Cleopatra is from the Ptolemaic line of Egyptian pharaohs. So technically, Cleopatra isn't ancient Egyptian, she's Greek. Ptolemy did intermarry into Egyptian nobility, so Cleopatra was a Greek, was not half Greek, half Egyptian, but along those lines. She was a hybrid of Greek and Egyptian. And so was the culture. It was extremely hybridic. Hybridic? Is that a word? Anyways, it brings us back to the idea of Hellenistic. Think of Hellenistic as a bridging of Greek with other things. In the East, that bridging of Greek with other things is the Persian plus the Greek. And then in Egypt, we're seeing Egyptian plus the Greek. We're going to be looking at a lot of art that comes out of the kingdom of Antigonus. Antigonus was one of Alexander's major generals, and he establishes a kingdom. And we're going to focus on this because there's a lot of money flowing in and out of Antigonus's kingdom. If you think about it in terms of a trade network, it is along this peninsula which allows for easy water trade with Egypt and land trade with the Seleucids, and then the Seleucids are going to be connected further into the east, to the far east. We got India and China, and that Silk Road is going to terminate or end in Antigonus's empire. So I want you to write this down in your notes because we're going to be seeing this over and over again throughout the rest of the semester. Ready? East equals money. When we turn our focus to Rome, we're going to be looking at how Rome is trying to and will succeed in absorbing the East, because the East is where the money's at. East has the most, not only the most trade networks, but also the biggest cities and the biggest stable systems of economy. So East is where the money's at, and that's why Antigonus's kingdom is thriving, because it is a bridge between the Western European continent and the Eastern Asian continent and the North African continent. Does that make sense? That's some context right there for you, right? Another thing of context with the Hellenistic period. It is at this time that we not only see a rise in wealth, a rise in money, but also a wealth of knowledge. Cities become these international cultural hubs. We see an increase in public libraries, increase in public art. We see major advances in science. The word cosmopolitan comes about during the Hellenistic, and cosmo means the universe. Politan means a citizen. So a cosmopolitan isn't that expensive fancy cranberry and vodka drink. A cosmopolitan is literally translates from the Greek to citizen of the world. So cosmopolitan, a citizen of the world. What we see in the arts is an extreme dedication to natural forms, natural shapes of the body, and expression. It's not idealized, it's more realistic, but with the intention of being more dramatic. Did you hear what I just said? Because you're probably going to want to write that down. In the arts, in the Hellenistic world, we see an increase in natural shapes and natural forms of the body that are not to be idealistic, like what we saw in the classical world, right? Doryphoros and Apoxymenos. Those guys are too perfect. So in the Hellenistic, we see a turn away from idealism, and the reason is because they want to amplify or increase the drama of the moment. It doesn't make sense yet because I haven't showed you any artworks, but I want to give you a heads up. In terms of architecture, ooh, we get a new player to the scene. Who is this? Okay, so we got Doric, we got Ionic, and who are you? Corinthian. Yep, do you notice? So we had our Doric order, very plain basic capital, no base. Ionic was more fancy. Little volutes here, bass going on. And then who's this new player? Who's come into town? The Corinthian order. The Corinthian order is identified by this extremely elaborate capital. The capital, it's a combination of volutes, like we see in Ionic, but also has these beautiful draping, lush leaves. You see that? The reason for the development of the Corinthian capital was actually quite, what's the word? Practical. The reason is because Ionic is pretty, but it doesn't allow for the perfect symmetry of a building. What do you mean, Ms. Cortez? It's symmetrical on either side. Well, on either side of the front, it's fine. But when you go to a corner of a building, then you need to have your volutes show up in the front and the side. And in order to keep that same appearance in the front and on the side, you got to do something like this. Do you see that? In order for an Ionic capital to work on a corner, you have to do this odd bend or stretch. And that's not ideal. It's not pretty. It's not great. The Corinthian capital solves that because it is sculpted in the round. It is read from all sides. It doesn't then require this additional pull or stretch. So now we have 3 Greek orders. Remember, Greeks, they love their rules, especially with architecture. And so we have our Doric, Ionic, and now we have a new player, the Corinthian. And with these 3 orders, the Greeks will say, okay, done. We got it. We're all set. Write these down. If it helps to write these down, think of the fact that they are named after their origin, their original location. The Doric order was first seen on the Doric Peninsula. The Ionic order was first seen in the group of islands called Ionia, the Ionia region of Greece. And then the Corinthian is called that because it was first seen on the island of Corinth. Ooh, cool, right? I thought you'd like that. So, remember our quiz? And we had these, Doric, Corinthian, Ionic. So here's our new player, the Corinthian. All of this stays the same. And in terms of what happens in the entablature, the Corinthian falls in line with the Ionic. It's very decorative. It'll have a frieze, the base of the column, and the elaborate capital. Everything follows the rules of the Ionic order, not the Doric. I'm debating, should I just tell you some more cultural context? Okay, I will, because talking about the hybridity of Hellenistic, we start to see these fantastic hybrids of faith. This is a cult statue of a goddess that is a mix of the Greek Persephone and the Egyptian Isis. Now, Isis is the goddess of the underworld for the Egyptians, and she's one of the major players in Egyptian mythology, especially in death. Persephone is a Greek goddess who also lives in the underworld. She's married to Hades, the god of the underworld. And so we start to see in the Hellenistic period, here we go, this gorgeous blending of faiths. Here, Isis is often identified by a disc above her head, and here we see that same disc in the statue of Persephone, Isis Persephone. Now, students sometimes ask, is that a problem to have these hybrids? Is this seen as sacrilegious? Great question. No, It wasn't. It wasn't seen as being incongruous. Instead, it's seen as writing two halves to make a whole. You have Persephone? Oh, well, I'm Egyptian. I have Isis. You say that Persephone should be worshipped? How about we put them together and we'll make a single goddess, Isis Persephone? Ah, neat, right?